Okay, it looks like the number of attendees is tapered off a little bit. So we will go ahead and get started this morning here in Chicago. Greetings and welcome to all of you who are joining us this morning from around the world. It's my pleasure to meet with you this morning and to share with you some information specific to your child's F1 or J1 visa status. We'll cover a few additional topics as well. But it's very nice to see you and to see so many parents joining us this morning. And I want to just start by recognizing how difficult and challenging I know it must be for many of you as the COVID-related entry restrictions to the United States remain in effect. We know and recognize that that has limited, for many of you, the ability to travel with your student to the US and to Chicago. And I can't imagine maybe how stressful, but just, how worrisome that can be. It's one thing to drop your kid off at college. It's another thing to put them on a plane and send them to a different country as that drop off. Kudos to all of you, as you navigate that. We do certainly hope that the COVID-related entry restrictions at some point in the future will be lifted. We have heard from the US government that they review those entry restrictions on a weekly basis. And as soon as we have additional information to share, we will certainly share it. And I'm happy to share it with those of you in attendance today, but certainly with your children, should the situation change. So here are some of the things that we are going to cover today, and they include certainly introductions, some introduction to the Office of International Affairs, the services that we provide and advising that we're equipped to share with your students and certainly with you today. Some interesting and important immigration information, and that is information also that has been shared with your students earlier this week as part of the pre-orientation program, and will be ongoing throughout the academic year. Of course, we'll touch on some safety and security, some additional information related to weather. We always get some interesting questions from parents about winter and preparedness, et cetera. And then definitely take some questions. Before we jump into that, I just want to draw your attention to the Zoom webinar taskbar. We will be using the Q&A function this morning that allows you to enter questions as we move along. And I will, definitely take time to answer them or to postpone answer for a future section. But definitely a good place for you to enter your questions. And if you find that a question pertains to you as well, then you can upvote or add a thumbs up to it, and it'll move that question further up in the list. So again, please use the Q&A function to ask any questions, and we will absolutely get to those. So moving right along, my name is Nick Siemens. I am the Assistant Dean of Students and Director at the Office of International Affairs. The Office of International Affairs is central to the university in that we serve certainly the college, but all of the professional and academic graduate schools and divisions. We work primarily with international student immigration, students on the F1 or J1 visa, but we also navigate and manage the employment-based immigration on behalf of the university. So filing H-1Bs, green cards, and other types of employment-based visa classifications. So as I mentioned, we act as a central resource to your students specific to their immigration status. So if they have questions about international travel, the employment authorization associated to their student visa, specifically as they pursue internships, we are available to provide information and answers to them about the specifics related to their student visa. In addition to that, we do provide some supportive programming in collaboration with campus units and our colleagues and friends across the organization to support our international student population at the university. And that, of course, includes the international pre-orientation, a number of additional programs through the college, working with career advancement, certainly, to support your students as they look for internships, and then as they get close to graduation, as they look toward post-graduation employment opportunities. Just a note here about the advising structure at the university or at the Office of International Affairs. Your students have been assigned an international student advisor from the Office of International Affairs, and we are in the process at the moment of reassigning that person, but your student, and I'm happy to follow up with a note to all of you, will have an advisor, someone that they can reach out to via email, telephone. We have found that through the pandemic, students much prefer to interact with us on a virtual level. It means that they can, wake up, roll out of bed, open their computer and ask a question in a far easier way than, if they were to walk over to our office, and they understandably prefer that. But it is, something that it is certainly something that they will be made aware of on an annual basis, and they will know who their advisor is. Before I continue, I think it's important also to note that the presentation today, in large part, is the same presentation that was offered to your students earlier this week, and will be the same session that will be offered to new students who are unable to attend international pre-orientation in the coming week or two as the quarter gets started, and we host some makeup sessions. So not to worry, the session this morning is also being recorded, as I understand it, and will be made available to students and potentially to you. So one of the things that we often like to tell students, there's a lot of immigration-related information, just like there is a lot of legal advice and information available online and discussion forums. Students have a tendency to speak to their friends at other institutions, and all of that is not a bad thing. It's always good to inform yourself and understand maybe some of the aspects of your immigration status in the United States. But I would remind parents and ask for your help in reminding your students that what they think might apply to them based on something they've read online may or may not actually be the case. And so their best source of immigration-related guidance is going to be from the Office of International Affairs at the University of Chicago. And as I said, there's an advisor available to students in the college, a number of advisors available in the office, should they ever need to speak to someone. And certainly, if you have questions, please feel free to reach out to me directly. But we always like to add that caveat here. So as I mentioned, our advising services, are available virtually. We find that students much prefer that to actually meeting in person. So we will continue with that on the occasion that a student absolutely requires or would like to speak to someone in person. Of course, if that comes up, we can navigate it, as it does come up to us. The OIA website, and I'm happy to share in the chat a link to the Office of International Affairs website, is a good and up-to-date resource, certainly for you, but also for your students. So if you're wondering about those COVID-related entry restrictions or anything else, specific to your student's student visa status, you can always refer to information on our website as well. And then I mentioned some of the supportive programs already, so we'll continue to move on. Some of the important information that we've shared with your students earlier this week, and that we will continue to share with them, through Welcome Week next week and as the quarter begins the week after, is a few reminders specific to their student visa status. The first is that we ask them to complete an international student online check-in that indicates to us that they've arrived safely in the US, that US Customs and Border Protection has entered them into the country in the correct status, and provides to us just an initial point of contact that we can then build from. The F1 and J1 student visas certainly require aspects of compliance that your students will need to be aware of. And listed here under number 2 are many of those requirements. So the first being that your students are required to be enrolled full-time throughout the academic year, certainly not the case for summer. We check that on a quarterly basis to ensure that they've at least enrolled in 3 classes or 300 units at the university. And if they haven't, we will reach out to them and ask, what's going on? What are you thinking? Maybe it was oversight or some other reason, but it is required. Students are also required to provide address updates of their US address throughout their time at the University of Chicago. And they do that via the my.uchicago.edu online portal. That's the location where all students actually not only provide their address or updates to their address, but they register for classes, they can view their grades, their tuition bill, et cetera. All of that is in that portal. The third point here being that students should work only with authorization. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. And then report any changes to us. And those include a leave of absence for some reason, as I mentioned, under enrollment, or even finishing their program early, if that is in fact the case. That those are all aspects of their status here in the US and at the University of Chicago that we would like for them to contact us about. The final thing here is just maintaining valid documents. We're going to talk a little bit more about the visa sticker as well as the I-20 or DS-2019 in just a moment. But I think it's important for me to remind you parents to help us ensure that your students have a valid passport. We know that the expiration date of the passport can come up pretty quickly, and a passport is required to be valid for 6 months into the future from the next dated arrival in the United States. And that can be problematic. We know from students, current students and students in the past, that if they do need to renew their passport, in many cases they can do that via the consulate or embassy of their home country here, either in Chicago or Washington, D.C., or they might be able to do it the next time that they travel home to visit. So just something to keep in mind. And we'll talk a little bit more about travel abroad and re-entry at this point. So as I mentioned, when an international student departs the US to come home for a visit or for a trip outside of the country, to re-enter, they will need their valid passport. As I mentioned, that passport is required to be valid for 6 months into the future from that next dated arrival. They will also need an unexpired F1 or J1 visa stamp. That is the visa stamp or sticker that was placed in your student's passport at the US consulate or embassy. And we'll talk a little bit more about what it means if that visa sticker does expire. And then they'll need their I-20 or DS-2019, a valid travel signature. And I see here already that there is a question specifically about travel signatures, and I'll answer that now. So the travel signature on the I-20 or DS-2019 is valid for 12 months from the latest dated signature that was provided by OIA, regardless of the number of times the student used it to depart the US and re-enter. We will start to send reminders to students, preceding winter break, and then certainly preceding, next summer, to remind them that if they need a new travel signature on the document that they have, how to go about obtaining that travel signature from the Office of International Affairs, and just, to remind them not to forget their immigration documents. At this point, the I-20s themselves are sent electronically, and that's perfectly fine and normal. The government has agreed to allow continuation of electronic I-20s. So that is something that can be done very quickly. Even if the students departed the US already, we can send them an updated I-20 with a valid travel signature even after they've arrived back to you at home. No problem. The DS-2019, that's the status document tied to the J-1 visa, is required to be original. It's important to note that the F-1 and J-1 visas themselves are governed by two separate government agencies within the US. It's bureaucracy at its finest. So it's not that the statuses are all that different, but the forms are different. Some of the benefits, are certainly a little bit different. In any case, these are the three documents that your student will need to travel home or travel abroad and re-enter the US. As mentioned here, if your student is traveling domestically, so within the US with friends, to interview for internships or jobs, etc., we do always recommend that they carry with them, of course, their passport and or I-20 DS-2019. The visa sticker itself is not necessarily pertinent to travel domestically within the US, because that visa stamp or visa sticker is used only for entry into the US from abroad. One of the things that we take the opportunity to remind students about is that they take photos or scanned copies of their passport, their visa stamp or sticker, as well as the I-20 or DS-2019. Those documents become very important, if they're lost or stolen or destroyed in some capacity. It's far easier to replace those things if the student has a valid copy in their photos, on their phone, or in their email in some capacity that can be helpful to them. Okay, so moving right along, I want to talk about the difference between the visa stamp, that's the sticker that's placed in the student's passport by the consulate or embassy, and the student's status. And that is dictated by either the I-20 document or the DS-2019. So I mentioned that the visa stamp or sticker itself is specific to entry into the United States. This means that some of you, your students, may have received a visa stamp or sticker that expires before the program end date that is listed on your student's I-20 or DS-2019 status document. And that's okay. If the visa stamp itself, the sticker placed in the passport, expires and the student is still in the United States at that time, continuing with their studies, they do not need to travel abroad immediately and renew their visa. It simply means the next time they depart the US, they will actually have to go through that renewal process at the US consulate or embassy to obtain an updated or new visa stamp or sticker in order to return and re-enter the United States. So we definitely, have shared this information with your students, but share it with you as well, that the visa only in coordination with the status document are used for entry into the United States, but legal stay, or the amount of time that your student can remain in the US legally, is dictated by the program dates listed on the I-20 or DS 2019. And this is a copy of an I-20, and I've highlighted here the program start and program end date. So this is the status document. It outlines, again, the validity of your student stay, and may be extended based on post-graduation employment benefits tied to the student visa itself. That includes OPT for F1 students or academic training for J1 students. And for those of you who may have students on a J1 visa, this is a sample copy as well, again, with the dates highlighted here. So that is, in fact, the difference between the visa stamp and status. So at the time of entry into the US, your student is presenting their valid passport, their valid I-20 or DS 2019, and presenting also their valid visa stamp or sticker. We tell students to just slide the I-20 or DS 2019 into the page in their passport that does contain their visa stamp or sticker, just to facilitate entry as they meet with a customs officer at a U.S. Port of entry, either an airport, etc. So upon entry in the F1 or J1 classification, a student will be issued an arrival record. This is called an I-94 arrival. And I showed a screenshot here. Some of you may remember at a time in this country when they used to issue a paper document that was the I-94 arrival record. And that process has been moved fully electronic and online. And this is the link here on the page where your students will be able to retrieve their I-94 record. And it's important to note that a student arriving in the US over the course of their time at the university will be issued an I-94 record each time they arrive. So if they travel home in the winter and return in January, they'll be able to, they will be issued a new I-94 arrival. Same thing if they travel home next summer or even over spring break, etc. Each and every time they arrive in the US, they will be issued a new arrival record. And we just recommend that students log in, retrieve a screen grab of their I-94 and add it to a running list, a running document that does highlight, when they arrived, certainly on what date and in what classification, the visa status. You see here on the screen that this person was entered as a B, but for our students, it would list their F or J. So again, the visa stamp or sticker itself can expire while your student is in the US. It just means they'll have to renew the next time they depart. It does not mean that they are in any way not here in a legal status, because their status is dictated by their I-20 or DS 2019. And we occasionally get questions about whether a student can renew their visa stamp or sticker within the US. And I don't necessarily know the reason for this. It could simply be because this is an entry document only, but the US government requires that renewal actually take place abroad at a US consulate or embassy. Some of you may have heard earlier this week, the US Department of State issued guidance to all consulates and embassies around the world, indicating that a student applying for an F or J visa could renew their visa stamp or sticker without having to attend the appointment or the interview at the consulate or embassy. It seems a little bit late in the game to be doing this at this point, but it could be helpful for future travels by your students, as they travel home again over winter break or summer or down the road. It may not be required that they attend the actual appointment at the consulate or embassy, but can renew it without appearing in person. So just keep that in mind. I see a question here from Ileana. Thank you, Ileana. When students go outside the US to visit their home country, do they need to do any process or get a stamp in their documents from your office? They do not require any pre-departure, stamp or any process, to be completed from the Office of International Affairs before leaving the United States. So again, just keep in mind that the travel signature on their document, their I-20 or DS-2019, is valid for 12 months, regardless of the number of times the student has traveled abroad and re-entered. So to answer your question, in the event that they travel next summer and they would like an updated travel signature from OIA, they can request that. Before leaving, and we're happy to provide it to them. Thank you for that. Thank you for that question. So I want to move into some information specific to employment options for international students on F1 or J1 visas. We occasionally get questions from students, but certainly from parents who ask about working on campus, and we'll talk here in a moment about working off campus. But that is the clear distinction for students on student visas. If you're working on campus as a research assistant for a faculty member, students often find jobs at the library, in administrative offices across the campus. If you're on a student visa, you do not require any prior permission or authorization to pursue one of those opportunities on campus. So your students could find a job on campus and work, if they so choose, if they would like to do that, so long as they do not exceed 20 hours a week, which would not be recommended just given the academic, their academic responsibilities and obligations. But that is the only regulatory aspect of this, of this employment type. On-campus employment is permitted so long as the student is limited in working no more than 20 hours per week. So again, without prior authorization or permission, your students can find on-campus jobs and begin working even though they are on a student visa. Students who are looking for off-campus employment opportunities are going to be a bit more restricted. And I think it's important to note here that, that paid or unpaid positions off campus absolutely require prior authorization or permission, either from the university through the Office of International Affairs, or in some cases from the government, specifically for students who are applying for employment authorization as they approach graduation. So again, paid or unpaid, volunteer opportunities are allowed so long as they're recreational and avocational in nature. And I use the example often, and this does come up for students who really just enjoy, animals, and they would like to volunteer time at a pet shelter or something like it. That, of course, is recreational and avocational and would not otherwise be prohibited. But students generally are not going to be eligible for internship authorization until next summer. So the caveat for the F1 or J1 visa holder is that they are not eligible for CPT, the employment benefit tied to the F1 visa, or academic training, the employment benefit tied to the J1 visa, until they have been in their program at the university for one academic year. We'd like for them to be in in their classes this year, and this is a government regulation, so it's not necessarily the university, but get comfortable with their academics, look for internships potentially for next summer, work with career advancement, and then they can apply for employment authorization, for internships starting in summer 2022. It's important to note here that we will be collaborating with career advancement to offer employment authorization workshops. We work very closely with them, specific to CPT and academic training. So if your students do have questions, they can ask questions, at that time from their career advisor, or again from their Office of International Affairs advisor. I'm going to just run through. I see a few questions popping up. So the first question specific to this topic is, transfer student new to the university, do you have to wait a year to do CPT? So I think in this case, if the student is starting their second year, then this is maybe not applicable. Typically, academic year internships are not necessarily going to be permitted, but your student should contact the Office of Career Services, Career Advancement, to learn more. They wouldn't necessarily have to wait until next summer. So that's a good question. You have to have been in F1 status for one academic year, whether that was at the University of Chicago or elsewhere, to be eligible for the CPT permission. That does not include, or that does not include any time spent in F1 status as a high school student. So I think that this clarification in this question is important. If you're starting your second year as a college student, then you are eligible for CPT now. Just to go back here to a question about travel. To get into the US, you need a visa, an I-20, and a valid passport that is valid 6 months into the future. So just keep that in mind. So the next question here is specific to enrollment certificate before school starts. I don't know, Alice, if a digest of your students' registration would satisfy the military service requirements. But you might ask your student to log into my.uchicago.edu as the quarter begins, and print or take a screen grab of their enrollment, for the coming quarter. I think that should probably, I think in the past, most students have used that as the enrollment verification to delay military service. Yeah, good question. Okay, so again, the main point here, I think, to remind your student is not to pursue an off-campus internship without first speaking to career advancement and their OIA advisor about whether they're eligible at the time to take an internship or to start working off campus. It's one of the it's something that is highly scrutinized in this country. Working without authorization or unlawful employment can negatively impact your student down the road, and that's what we want to avoid. We do not want them to work without authorization. So a quick summary here of some of the things that we've talked about before we move on. Again, your student, once they arrive in the US and they're able to retrieve their I-94 record, should complete check-in with the Office of International Affairs. That's an online process, and there is a direct link on our website that they can use to complete that process. Just a reminder to them to maintain their F4J visa status throughout the academic program, and that includes some of those things that we talked about, including enrollment each quarter, reporting changes, not working without authorization, etc. Students are reminded when traveling abroad not to forget their documents. If they lose their I-20 or DS-2019, they should reach out to OIA and we can reprint one for them, even if that needs to come to them after they've departed the US. And then I think it's important to understand the difference between your visa status and the visa stamp or sticker, and knowing that the visa stamp or sticker can expire while you're still in the US does not require your immediate travel abroad to renew the visa stamp. And again, on-campus work without authorization or approval is totally permitted, just not more than 20 hours. And any off-campus employment opportunity, and that could be paid or unpaid, does still require authorization. So one of the other questions that we often get is about the Social Security number. And I want to provide some information to you this morning about that, as well as the individual tax identification number. Both of these are tax ID numbers specifically. Neither of them is employment authorization in the United States. So if your student is eligible and applies for a Social Security number, that does not grant them employment authorization. They still need to work with the Office of International Affairs to secure employment authorization before they start working off campus. But a Social Security number can be helpful for students as they open bank accounts, certainly not required, as they start cell phone plans, here in the US, but again, not required, but typically is used for tax reporting purposes. And we'll talk in just a moment about that process, US taxation. Most incoming international students will not be eligible for an SSN until they start their summer internships next summer. An F1 or J1 student needs a job offer, and that could be on campus this coming academic year, or off campus next summer, before they're eligible to apply for a Social Security number. And then the final note here is that, if any of your students at any time were issued an SSN in the United States, that number remains valid to them for life, right? So even if the card cannot be found, if your student to do anything that might require their Social Security number. We remind students, to keep their Social Security number safe. It's not, something that they should be sharing widely. Certainly they should not provide it to someone who sends them an email and asks for it. Again, most banks and cell phone providers are going to approach this delicately and ask only if it's absolutely necessary to see the card or verify the Social Security number in some capacity. But it is a way in the U.S. To identity fraud or identity theft, to share your Social Security number with someone who might use it for bad purposes. So just remind your students as they apply for an SSN, at a certain point down the road, they should keep that number safe and not offer it up all that freely to anyone who asks. The individual tax identification number is used solely for someone who is receiving funding from the university, and that could be in the form of a scholarship or a grant, et cetera. We will be working directly with those students through the college if in fact they need to apply for an individual tax identification number. If your student has been granted a Social Security number, the ITIN is no longer applicable. It's not necessary if you have an SSN. And again, the ITIN is really only to disperse funding that's coming from a source like the university. If your student, for whatever reason, if it's determined that they need an ITIN, at the time that they file their US tax returns next year, they will be guided through that process. And so to move into that, US tax responsibilities, F1 and J1 students who were present in the US at any time during the preceding calendar year are required to file some forms with the Internal Revenue Service, even if they did not work in the US. So the tax year in the US is January through December. And early in the calendar year, the Office of International Affairs, a number of other offices on campus will start to send some information to your students about their tax filing responsibilities. And in the event that they work, at any point, then, they can file for a refund if they've overpaid taxes. And if they did not work, they should still file a form with the IRS to indicate that they had no earned income in the US in the preceding year. The Office of International Affairs makes available to all international students some tax preparation software that is specific to students on F1 or J1 visas called Sprint Tax. And we will release that information to students typically in early March of each calendar year, but there will also be workshops in collaboration with the University Bursar and Payroll, online webinars, et cetera, outlining tax obligations in the US. Okay, so a few final reminders before we jump into something else. As I mentioned, and we need your help in reminding students to keep their immigration documents safe, to keep both physical and electronic copies of those documents. Starting in October, the Office of International Affairs will start to distribute a newsletter to all international students, and in it will be updated guidance and reminders, if anything changes related to COVID entry restrictions, et cetera. All of that is sent in a twice monthly newsletter from the Office of International Affairs to new students. And if you're interested in subscribing to that, I will also at the end here chat in a link to where you can go to subscribe. And it's important, to note here that there are a number of scams at any given time running in the United States. And oftentimes these scams target international students, where a student might receive a phone call from someone who pretends to be a government official. This individual may know some very specific or individual information about the student that they're contacting, and may then threaten them for payment with arrest of family members, etc. And I think it's important to note this here with you because it does happen. It happens throughout the year. We remind students continually, no government official will call you on the phone. And certainly no government official will call you and threaten to arrest you unless you pay them money or pay a fine or pay a fee. If your student does get a phone call like this, we just ask that they contact us to report it. We can share with them some next step information. I think it's often just important for them to be able to call someone and say, look, this just happened to me and it kind of scared me. It's something that happens to even me. It seems like at least once per week, getting a phone call from someone who claims to know my social security number or needs, me to pay a fine or a fee for something related to my car or something like that. So just a warning, if you're talking to your student and they say they got a strange phone call, it likely was a scam. Please remind them not to give any personal information to someone calling on the phone, not their social security number, and certainly not sending via, via Venmo or Zelle. Oftentimes, these scam artists will ask for Apple gift cards or gift cards in general that can be redeemed over the phone, and that's not something that we want your student to encounter, or if they do, to at least know how to navigate. I want to touch on campus safety and security, and I know that this will be something that many of you, worry about, and we certainly, take it seriously. And I've listed here a few of the resources available to students, but also to parents. And I'm sure that you're getting some of this information already from our colleagues at the college. But C Alert is a good system that will alert the university community if there's anything happening, and that could be a natural event like a storm or closure of classes due to snow or cold, or anything else along those lines. And then the UChicago Safe mobile app is a great way for your student just to remain up to date on what's happening on campus and to know and learn about resources available to them that could include transportation options if they are studying with friends late at night and they need safe transportation home. All of these things are outlined app and on the website that I've linked to below. Yeah, so some good questions here. Is there any way to safely store important documents in your room? I think it's up to you to figure out a system that works well for you. Keeping your dorm room door locked at all times, is certainly going to be helpful, to mitigate that. But we don't typically, see issues around this, given that the student residences are so secure. You have to have, an ID card, and even then, there are desk attendants and others, who are constantly monitoring who's coming and going. So I think it's important that if you're worried about how to store your documents, again, finding a system that works for you, whether that's, a brightly colored folder, or box of some kind, where you're placing your passport, your I-20 or DS-2018, et cetera, as well as maintaining electronic copies of those documents, as I mentioned. Josephine, this is a good question. I believe that all students, and I would ask Matt if he knows the answer to this to chat it in, but I do believe that all students receive C alerts. They can set their preferences specifically if they prefer to receive C alerts via email or phone call or text. For example, I set my C alerts to come to me via email, telephone call, and email. That way I'm not missing anything, but it's a good question. And students can set their preferences, there as well. Here are some, I think just important reminders. And again, we've shared these with your student as well. And I know that they'll be getting some additional information, about this throughout, orientation. But it's important that students understand that, they need to protect themselves. They may be coming from, coming from a country or from a culture even, where, they might be accustomed or comfortable, walking at night, maybe not locking their door, maybe not locking up their bike. I think these are kind of basic, steps to protect not only your personal self, but also your property. And the university safety and security team has a lot of information on their website about registering your bike. In the event that it's stolen, it can be returned to you. Some tips and guidance about what to do if you're studying in the library and you don't, want to pack up your computer to go to the restroom. All of these things, are aspects, that need to be considered. Of course, in the US, the emergency assistance number is 911. By calling that, university police will actually respond immediately. There are a number of blue towers placed all over campus that have large red buttons on them. If a student feels or they feel like they need assistance in any form, that could be medical assistance, police assistance, etc., and they see one of those blue light towers, they can press the red button. And again, that will alert UChicago Police to their location, and they will respond immediately. And then, of course, one of the things that we definitely tell students is just get in the habit, of taking routine precautions. Things that, I think has kind of exploded, for many of us is the use of ear pods, headphones, other things. Certainly if you're riding on the bus and you want to listen to music, that's not a bad thing. But if you're walking down the street by yourself, and you have your headphones on or your earbuds in, then you might not be as aware of what's happening around you than you could be if you weren't wearing something in your ears, to block the noise. And then certainly, as I mentioned, walking in groups, when you're walking around at night, if you need transportation assistance, to make use of university resources. The university has, really has a lot of really good resources available to all students and information on the safety and security website that I mentioned earlier. Some practical information here for you specific to weather. I know that one question that we often get from students who are maybe coming from a climate that does not necessarily get so cold is, what should I be prepared for when winter arrives? And typically, winter doesn't necessarily set in Chicago until December, and you see here what the average highs and lows can be. There are times when the university may cancel classes due to cold or due to the amount of snow that falls. But in general, I think it's important just to note that the university is prepared for winter. Sidewalks are cleared of ice and snow, buildings are heated, often hot water is available throughout. And we remind students to enjoy winter. The university has an ice skating rink on the Midway that can be fun activity in winter. And then, of course, there are always questions about where to go to buy winter clothing. And often students, learn of those best practices in speaking to other students. But I think, it's something that we don't always consider, in winter, or excuse me, at this point, the students arrived on campus, they're excited. The autumn quarter is going to start very quickly. The quarter system is a fast-paced academic, environment. It's rigorous. And it means that, autumn quarter is probably going to be exciting and fun. By the time winter quarter rolls around, the student will have been here for a few months and may not, maybe experiencing a bit of culture shock, may not be, may still be adapting to the pace of the quarter system. And then all of a sudden, the sun is only going to be up, from 7 or 8 a.m. To maybe 4 or 5 p.m. So the winter can be kind of dark. The evenings can be long, and this is when we encourage students to get involved. To find activities, maybe through the athletic center if they have hobbies there, or with student groups if they're interested. Winter is a good time to really start to get involved in some of those activities so that you have a social network. So some final notes here before I take any last questions. OIA does remain open and available. As I mentioned, we know from students that they prefer to interact with us virtually, and so we will continue to support that so long as they want it. We're available on social media, but also I mentioned the newsletter that will be started in October. And then, any questions whatsoever, your student should feel free to reach out to OIA, and that includes to their advisor. There's a wealth of support and resource available to your student, including their international student advisor, their academic advisor, counseling and health services, career advising, through the Office of Career Advancement, and the Center for Student Activities, et cetera. Lots of opportunity. iHouse is a good opportunity for students if they're interested in learning about programs available to all students, and that can be interesting and fun. So with that, I'm going to just open it to any final questions. I'm going to stop my screen share here, and if you have any question at all, like I said, please feel free to add it into the Q&A box here. And while we wait for a few questions, I will chat in a few. I'll chat in a few links here specifically about some of the things that I've discussed. So the first thing here is the Office of International website. And the second thing is going to be a link to subscribe to the OIA newsletter. As parents, you're welcome to join us via that newsletter and receive those issues as well. And then the final thing I'm going to chat in here is the OIA check-in link. That's where your student can go to complete check-in. So there is another question. Do students need to check in after arrival every time they travel back to the US or just the first time? And the answer to that is just the first time. After that, they should just, as I mentioned, retrieve their I-94 record, let us know if they have any issues in arrival or passing through customs, but they will not need to complete the online check-in every single time they travel abroad and re-enter. The next question is about whether the student residences will be open during the winter holiday to international students who may not be able to return home. Typically, I know that housing and residential life at the university will offer some winter break housing. It may not mean that your student can remain in their specific room, but they may all be those students who are unable to go home or choose not to, may be moved into a temporary space to be together, so that they're not not alone in their residences otherwise. That's a good question. All right. Are there any other questions? And I'm happy to give it a few minutes here. But I would also just like to take the opportunity to thank you for joining this morning or this afternoon, wherever you might be. We are very excited to have your students here. And again, I recognize how challenging certainly the COVID-19 situation has made or interrupted your plans for travel with your student to the US and to the University of Chicago. But we are extremely happy to have them. they will, be well taken care of while they're here. Question about Thanksgiving break. Will the student residence halls be open? The answer to that is yes. They will not necessarily close. The next question, do students have to move all their possessions out of their dorm room during winter break? I don't believe that's necessary. They will remain in their room for the coming academic year. It may mean, however, that if they stay here during winter break, they might not have access to their room, but they will receive information, from their residents, their resident head, and their hall director leading up to winter break to say, if you're staying and moving to another building for winter break, make sure that you pack a bag of the things that you think you might need. And of course, if something comes up, it's likely that they will be able to manage that and ensure that they can get back into their room if they need to, but they do not need to move out completely leading up to winter break. That's not necessary. Is there assistance provided to students arriving alone from abroad? So in terms of a shuttle, shuttle service from O'Hare Airport is not ideal. Students, receive information leading up to the arrival about using rideshare, specifically Lyft, Uber, etc. We always recommend that students, communicate with peers who might be coming from the same city or country to, navigate or think about, how they might, travel to campus together. But a shuttle is not necessarily provided from O'Hare. And I know Matt is writing an answer here to this question. Are there any other questions? And what I will also do is include my email address. So if you do have questions, following today's presentation, please feel free to reach out to myself. Certainly. And as I mentioned, your student will receive an email soon from their OIA advisor, who will be one of many advisors and resources, available to them while they're here at the university. And with that, I see no more questions. So again, I appreciate your time today, and hopefully, look forward to meeting you at some point, in the future. Have a wonderful rest of the day, wherever you might be, and wishing you all a good weekend as well. Take care. Thank you so much.